That's exactly the point.
And when do you think this first man was created?
We don't know. I mean, we don't have any textual evidence to show when exactly it was created.
Do you have like an idea or a guess?
No. All we have is biblical information for that. We don't have any like hadith that tells us when Adam was created or something like that.
Content over everything!
We don't have any Islamic evidences for that.
And how about the Earth? Do you believe the Earth was created as well, or?
Yeah, the whole universe was created by God.
And you believe that, yeah?
Yeah.
Well, Islamically, that's what they say, yeah.
Yeah, so obviously the verse of the Quran is أَوَلَمْ يَرَى الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا أَنَّ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضَ كَانَتَا رَتْقًا فَفَتَحْنَاهُمَا وَجَعَلْنَا مِنَ الْمَاءِ كُلَّ شَيْءٍ حَيٍّ أَفَلَا يُؤْمِنُونَ in Surah Al-Anbiya, chapter 21 of the Quran, verse 30, where it says that have the disbelievers not seen that the heavens and the earth were together and then Allah split them apart and we created from water every living thing? Do they not then believe? وَجَعَلْنَا فِي الْأَرْضِ رَوَاسِيَ أَن تَمِيدَ بِهِمْ.
But what has that got to do with the Earth and its existence?
Yeah, so we believe that the earth and the universe, the heavens and the earth, were all created by God.
Right. So it was created at some point in time. And also Islam has an opinion on how long ago it was created either.
No, because the question of how long the earth was, or the universe was created, you know, the word yawm in the Arabic language, according to Al-Isfahani, it means أي زمن من الأزمنة. The word yawm means any time period. Yeah? So when it says sittat ayyam, that the creation of the heavens and the earth were in 6 days, we know that from chapter 69 verse 8, في يوم كان مقداره 50,000 سنة, that a day can be 50,000 years. In chapter 32 of the Quran, it says ألف سنة مما تعدون, 1,000 years. So a day can be 1,000 years, it could be 50,000 years. In Surah Al-Ma'idah, اليوم أكملت لكم دينكم وأتممت عليكم نعمتي ورضيت لكم الإسلام دينا. Al-Yawm here could mean less than a day. So, as Asfahani mentions in his dictionary, the word Yawm could mean any period of time. It could mean a short period of time. It could mean a long period of time. Another evidence for that.
It could be like a neon. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. So another evidence for that is that the Sahaba asked the Prophet Muhammad one time, "What do we do when Ad-Dajjal comes?" Ad-Dajjal is, we believe, is an antichrist. Yeah. So he said, the first day, how do we pray and so on? Yeah. So he said the first day is going to be like a year. But how can a day be like a year unless it could be described as longer than 24 hours, right? So, and then he said the second day is a month and so on. So when the Quran says 6 days, we don't know the length of those days. For sure. I mean, there's some guesses.
Well, then that's a very strange way of using the word day, then, because the word day usually just means like 24 hours in most languages, I assume.
It could mean that as well.
Because in English, for example, we don't have the use of like day as in the sense of aeons.
Yeah, all right. So that's the difference between the Arabic language and the English language. So,
but that would be peculiar to the Arabic language, because as far as I'm aware, I don't know any other language that has the idea that a day is longer than 24 hours.
I don't know all the languages of the world, so I couldn't give you an answer.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know if they have it in French or.
I'm pretty sure that in Hebrew, like old earth creationists of from the Bible, they argue the same thing. They say the day is epoch, and they use a language kind of evidence base for that. So
it sounds like Quranic Arabic is different to the everyday Arabic.
Yes.
That's strange. Okay.
What's your name, by the way?
My name is Mark.
Mark, nice one.
Nice to meet you.
So the creation story, if you like, from an Islamic perspective, is radically different from that which we find in Genesis. Because in Genesis you have this very particular kind of chronology, ordering, and so on. Now, in the first day God created the night and the day, and the third day created the sun, and the second day, all of those things. We don't find that detailed chronology in the Quranic discourse. And of course the idea that God rested on the seventh day is refuted in the Quranic discourse.
Well, it sounds like you're just saying you don't know.
What? About what?
Well, regarding the existence of the first, regarding the human, how humans came to existence, and regarding the age of the earth, you're saying it sounds like it happened like it's a long time ago, and we just don't really know.
Yeah, I think scientists would say that. Some scientists would say no, it happened 13.9 billion years ago. That is the dominant model now, obviously with Big Bang theory and so on. And we don't reject the fact that there is a possibility that the universe could be 14 billion years old. But for me to tell you that for certain that it did exist for that long would be, I think, intellectual dishonesty. Because we could find, obviously, theories or evidences in the future which counteracts that thesis. But from our perspective, we don't have a problem with that. So we don't have a problem with dinosaurs as well. Like a young age creationist, Christian, would see that the idea of dinosaurs as conspiracy, like, you know, the fossils were thrown in there or something like that. We don't have an issue with it. We don't have an issue with the Earth being 14 billion years old. We don't have an issue with dinosaurs. All of those things are fine for us.
But right, so I'm just trying to figure out. So basically, you don't really know. Is what you're saying regarding the age of the universe and this.
Are you talking about me or the scientific community?
No. I mean, I'm saying the Islamic community.
There's no textual evidences to give you exact dates. We don't have
exact dates, not even exact dates, like even estimates.
Yeah. Not even estimates. So in Jewish tradition, you have a Jewish calendar.
Yeah.
Literally, where from the beginning of time until now, that's kind of like, you know, put into calendar format. We don't have such calendar. Our calendar starts when the Prophet migrated. It's called the Hijab calendar. So we don't have the format of, you know, this is the age where the universe began and so on, and now this is 7,000 years on from that, which is what the Jews some Jews would say. We don't have that. So we just have we have the generic Quranic text, which is facilitative of a multi-layered kind of understanding of how long the age of the universe, the Earth, and so on is. And it's up to the scientific community to give us theories and propositions for how long that is, and we can look at the evidences on that basis and either reject or accept them. So this is a secular kind of exercise rather than a religious one. You know? And science should not be done through the lens of religion. I mean, the idea of the scientific method is it should be done independent of any religious supposition, right? Because if you have a religious bias and you impose that on science, obviously, then you're going to have a skewed scientific kind of result.
What if you do it the other way? What about like when you've got like blatant errors in the book that people have claimed is like really holy and like?
You want to come here so I can see?
Not really. I'm happy
Oh,
here,
I'm
but
sorry.
I can move if you want. If you can't hear us.
Yeah. No,
I can't hear your question over here, mate.
No, because not everyone can
I
hear.
can't hear your
Oh, I
question.
repeat. Well, I've forgotten it. You repeat it.
You've forgotten the question.
Yeah. Like you're saying it the one way. You should start with religion, then move towards science. I'm saying when like religion is just completely at odds with science.
Yeah. So here's a few things that we have to be clear about.
Question?
And this is where I think there is becoming an increased understanding of how this works. I think I'm going to mention his name again. Thomas Kuhn wrote a good book on this, the structure of scientific revolution, where we have to be careful as to what extent we give epistemic weight to science and scientific discourse.
Yes.
So one thing I would say is that science is not omniscient or able to discover. Yeah, right. So it's not the only guide to truth, and it has the propensity to be corrigible. It's not something which is actually
Do you
perfect.
think Islam is a good route to truth?
Yes.
Do you think Islam is a good route to truth?
Yes.
I think Islam, from a rational perspective, requires, like anything else, a discursive rationalization in order for it to be reached. Now, I, as a Muslim, believe in immediate knowledge of God, right? That's a spiritual, a psycho-spiritual perspective. I say that human beings are born believing in God, and that the Quran and the Sunnah, they basically re-guide human beings back to their primordial state. That's my claim.
Yes.
But from a rational perspective, that's a different discussion. Islam, like any other thing out there, needs to be arrived at not only through spirituality or psychology, although I would maintain that that's enough for me, right? But for others, it might require a discursive rationalization. So the idea that God exists, that the idea that the Prophet Muhammad is a true prophet, like anything else, we say should be rationalized and can be rationalized.
And what is the rationalization for that?
So to start off with God's existence, I'm sure you've heard many arguments, like the cosmological argument, the teleological argument, the ontological argument, the contingency argument, and so on. And so those arguments are meant to show that it's actually rationalizable to believe that God is one, God exists, and
Can I jump in? So when you say God, I'll agree. I'll go along with some sort of God, like pantheism or consciousness, yeah? But you sort of have like a Quranic God or like an Islamic God. But what about all the other gods that were created?
Right, so that's a good question.
Thank you very much.
At this point, I'm not talking about the Islamic understanding of God.
My intuitiveness of your speaking though is that it is going to eventually arrive at a Quranic
No,
God.
but at this point in time, where we're talking about a discursive rationalization, of God.
Sure.
Right? I'm just talking about an idea that revokes atheism. Because atheism is the existence that no God is a lack of existence.
You said I can go along with the idea of a God.
Yes.
Right, so he is actually agreeing with you right now.
Right, so that's perfect. If you agree.
But there's another question.
Yeah.
No problem. Now, as our scholars say, we have scholars that there's a very interesting phraseology which is لا مشاحة في الاصطلاح. That you can use whatever word you want to use.
Yes.
If you want to use, for the sake of argument, if you want to use the word consciousness or energy or whatever,
I agree.
I haven't got a problem with that. So long as we accept that there is an entity there which is independent, one, immaterial, incorporeal, and...
No, well,
yeah, go ahead.
I know what you're trying to say. You're trying to say what is the common language of discussing these topics?
What I'm saying is that what do we need? This is the question.
Well, ask him. He knows what he's on about. Ask him.
What I'm saying is, what is required in order for there to be a movement away from atheism into either a deism or a theism? Because both of those things, deism and theism, are naturally averse to the atheistic thesis. Yeah. So if you believe in deism or theism, you can no longer reconcile that belief with atheism. You can't be a deist atheist, right?
But, yeah, I agree.
Right. So
that's the argument against hardcore atheists. Most atheists say I'm 99% atheist, and they sort of leave open unanswerable questions, and then they try and get into the nitty-gritty of stuff like evolution and sort of like, well, basically just evolution and material physics and things like this.
Well, evolution is a biological phenomena, isn't it? Right?
Yeah, sure.
So we have to first take a step back, because the existence of evolution depends on biology, and biology depends on chemistry. Because what is biology? It's the study of living things, right?
Yeah.
That's what differentiates biology from chemistry, right? And so we can't even start talking about biology unless we've had a good enough discussion about chemistry and physics.
Sure, yeah.
So obviously the existence of the universe predates the existence of human beings, right? And living creatures in that universe.
Yeah.
So I think a proper and a good enough starting point for an atheistic discussion would not be about biology, because that's kind of like a micro aspect. It would be about physics and chemistry.
Can I go the other way? Yeah. I agree with this. I quite like this conversation at the moment. But as soon as you're eventually going to try and walk in the Quran into this conversation, aren't you?
At this point in time, we're talking about...
No, but eventually you're going to. That's where your biases lie.
If you want me to talk about the Quran, I can.
No, I'm going to say, you're going to bring it in. Do you know what I'm saying? Do you agree?
Yeah,
well, I can bring in whatever you want me to bring in. If you don't want me to bring it in, I won't.
It just seems a bizarre concept. Like,
yeah.
Am I right? Am I making...
I know what you're saying.
No, I'll have a conversation on whatever you want me to have a conversation on, right?
No, I'm just jumping in.
No,
I'm just...
This is something called poisoning the well, right? If we're talking about God and discursive rationalization, how to arrive at the immaterial, incorporate, independent being, right? That's a conversation.
I agree.
That will take someone away from atheism to either deism or theism, okay?
Yeah.
Or at least to agnosticism, right?
Yeah.
But you can't be an atheist and believe in an independent, deistic kind of conception of God.
We've got to one place, and I'm asking, we've got here.
Yeah.
How are you going to bring in the Quran?
I can do whatever you want. If you don't want to...
Do it. Bring it in. Go for it.
All
Why
right,
is the Quran so brilliant? Go for it.
So it's not about a question of why is the Quran so brilliant. I think the more fundamental question is, now we've discussed the cosmos, and if we do agree that there's one God, and that, or call it whatever you want to call it, this entity, this thing that's independent, incorporate, material, and so on. Question is the relationship between us as biological entities, as sentient beings, conscious beings, and this other entity, is this meant to be a relationship which is personal or impersonal? That's an important question. So I would submit to you today that it seems quite inconceivable that an all-knowing entity would position human beings on this earth with the ability to make decisions in life and not give them a decision to make. It would seem quite a useless thing to do. And moreover, it would seem even more useless for this entity, which is meant to be the all-knowing and most wise entity, for him or for that entity to be itself, or whatever you want to call it, itself, purposeless, right?
Yeah, haven't you jumped the gun here?
So how do you ascribe purpose? How do you? Sorry.
I don't mind. You started this conversation. I'm on your side. I'm not like you.
How do you ascribe this purpose to this creator that you're talking about? because there is a possibility that it could be purposeless. And some have argued that, like the Upanishads and for example, Arthur Schopenhauer was one very, very famous German philosopher who argued that, that God does exist, but it's a purposeless. It's meaningless. It doesn't have any. And obviously, he made a philosophy out of it, the philosophy of pessimism. But how does Islam differ from that?
So Islam posits that, and in fact there are verses in the Quran about this, yeah? أَيَحْسَبُ الْإِنسَانُ أَن يُتْرَكَ سُدًى. That does the human being think that he will be left purposeless? أَلَمْ يَكُنْ نُطْفَةً مِّن مَنِيٍّ يُمْنَى. Was that human being not a sperm drop from that which was emitted? ثُمَّ كَانَ عَلَقَةً فَخَلَقَ فَسَوَّى. Then he became a clinging, clot-like thing. So God then created him and proportioned him. أَلَيْسَ ذَلِكَ بِقَادِرٍ عَلَى أَن يُحْيِيَ الْمَوْتَى. Is this entity not able then to raise the dead or to create life after death? So the idea is, number one, there are two kind of questions the Quran mentions, yeah? And it answers the question itself. Number one, why would God be purposeless? I mean, why would this entity that we've talked about itself be a purposeless entity, right? So the Quran says, لو أردنا أن نتخذ لهوا لاتخذناه من لدنا إن كنا فاعلين. It says that if we wanted to take some, why would we create the universe, right? And so it says, is it for play? Is it some kind of amusement? Is it some kind of activity which is for entertainment, right? And if we wanted to take an entertainment, we would have done that from within ourselves if we were really going to do that. But then God says, بل يقذف بالحق على الباطل فيدمغه فإذا هو زاهق. This is a falsehood claim, right? It's a claim of falsity. You can't say that God, that creates everything with a teleos, right? With some kind of purpose, would do something without any purpose. To be detached from his creation, to be impersonal, to be, to be aloof, to be an aloof God, if you like. This doesn't make any sense from that perspective.
Yeah, but it doesn't. Just because it doesn't make any sense, so it doesn't mean you can just discard it. Because so far, the Quranic verses you've given me, they haven't mentioned anything about purpose, God's purpose. You just said a sperm becomes a child and then...
No. The verse before, it says, does the human being think that he will be left aimless, right? And the reason why the sperm thing was mentioned is to show that everything in life has a teleos. That the sperm itself found the egg almost in navigatory fashion, right? It navigated itself to the egg. It was fertilized. It went through a process. All of that required guidance, isn't it? So if isn't it? If you had a sperm that didn't know where it was going, think about it, right? What would be the result of that? You wouldn't have any life.
That is the process. Well, they haven't got a purpose of knowing where they're going.
They detect
No, I mean obviously the sperm and the egg meet at some point, isn't it?
Oh, of course.
Yeah. So if the sperm didn't know where it was going, imagine if it was like it had a bad navigation, right? If it had a bad navigation, it would not meet the egg. Therefore, all of us wouldn't be here today, right? And so the idea is that God fixes a teleos for things, animate or inanimate, whether they have an active intellect or not, and that includes the cosmos and all that's within it. So why did God mention أَيَحْسَبُ الْإِنسَانُ أَن يُتْرَكَ سُدًى? Does the human being think that he'll be left aimless? And then mention sperm. أَلَمْ يَكُنْ نُطْفَةً مِّن مَنِيٍّ يُمْنَى. He was a sperm drop. ثُمَّ كَانَ عَلَقَةً. Then he was developed into alaqa. Alaqa is a clot, that clings on to the uterine whatever wall or whatever of the mother. So if that's the case, there was a whole developmental process that required the divine guidance.
Why does it require divine guidance?
Well, let's not say divine guidance. It required some guidance. Let's just say it's not divine for the sake of argument, right? But if the sperm didn't know where it was going, it wouldn't be fertilized with the egg, right? So it's like it has a special navigation device on it. It knew exactly where it was going. So here, if the argument goes, and you can think about it like this, if God is assigning and ascribing purpose to things with a minimal or, if any, active intellect, then what about us as sentient beings with an active intellect? How could there be no purpose for us? If in our very inception, our beginning was a sperm drop, and then we had purpose. So how could we not have purpose now?
But how do you extrapolate that from a purpose to a sperm cell
Because
to a human?
the idea is guidance, right?
A human and a sperm cell is quite different.
Look, I'll tell you why. Let me tell you that this is interesting. I was thinking about this verse myself, right? And what I understood from this verse is, if you think about human beings in the maze of life, yeah? We are in a maze of life and we require a special kind of navigation, okay?
We do.
Yeah, well, that's the assumption, right? We're in the maze of life, just like the sperm in the beginning of its life knew where it was going almost intuitively. We would say that was a guidance, a divine guidance. So in our very kind of infant stages, even less before the infant stages, and before the genome stage, as a sperm, we knew where we were going. And just as we required that special navigation at that time to know where we're going, now we require a kind of special divine navigation to also know where we're going at this point. So that requires...
When you say we, you're including
human
the sperm
beings.
and the human being at the same time. But the sperm and the human being are very different.
Well, we started off as sperm, isn't it? If you think about it. I mean, if it wasn't for a sperm, we wouldn't be
But its
here.
complexity is incredibly small
I think it's quite different
compared to humans.
When you say purpose, when you say purpose, and you talk about human beings, I think in the everyday language, I think that means something quite different to a sperm going after an egg.
Well, there's similarities and differences. The similarity is the assumption of guidance. We need to get from point A to point B. For us as Muslims, we believe that there's a spiritual guidance that we require. We're not just here purposeless. If the sperm was a purposeless entity, it wouldn't know where it's going and we wouldn't be here. And we say the same thing. If we are purposeless entities, we wouldn't know where we're going and we wouldn't get anywhere. And so what's required is for us to realize our navigatory purpose in life and to navigate in that direction. And that's what the divine guidance was. So all the prophets, we believe, and messengers, including Noah and Abraham and all those other prophets that you might have heard of, Jesus and Moses, they came to tell their people about this special kind of divine guidance. And really what it is to obey the divine law. Because in the Islamic understanding, everything in the universe is either willingly or unwillingly submissive to the divine commands.
Including humans.
Including human beings. The only difference is, because human beings by...
Because that doesn't really explain why there are so many societies which are not religious.
That's a really good question.
It sounds
Yeah.
like what you're saying to me, that religion or the belief in a God is intrinsic to the human. Is that?
Absolutely.
Well, then that would explain a lot about societies that don't believe in God, and atheistic societies.
Yes. No, but even those, right.
And even prehistory, a lot of societies didn't really believe in it.
Yeah.
In a
No,
single divine.
that's accounted for by the Islamic narrative. So the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said in the hadith, which is narrated by Abu Hurairah, he says, كُلُّ مَوْلُودٍ يُولَدُ عَلَى الْفِطْرَةِ. Everyone that is born upon a primordial disposition to believe in the one God. Then his parents socialize him into being Jew, Christian, or Magian, and so on, right? So we believe that those other ways of life are an aberration from the primordial state. So in other words, being a Jew, or being a Christian, or being a Magian, or being an atheist are all social constructs.
Including Jewish and
Yeah, but
no.
Judaism and Christianity,
Not
parts of it
Islam.
are true. Parts of it are true and parts of it are not. So parts of it are social constructs.
But Islam is not socialization.
Yeah, so
Quite a
Islam.
claim.
Yeah, that's the claim.
Quite a
That's the
claim.
The claim is that Islam is itself a recognition of the primordial state. That's a claim. I told you that's immediate knowledge that we believe is fitra. It's a primordial state, right?
It
Because
doesn't sound like there's much there. You're just saying it's intrinsic and it's a primordial disposition
Well,
towards believing in
there's
Islam. Because
Yeah,
if you look at the history of humanity, Islam is a very, very young religion.
Yeah.
So, I mean, why would that make Islam a religion which doesn't socialize as opposed to Judaism, Christianity, or pantheism, which you believe does socialize?
Well, look, I'm not saying that you haven't asked a good question, but a better question would be possibly, right? Why would something that's a social construct be false in the first place, right? Because just because something is socially constructed, it doesn't mean it's false. That's one point. I think the best way out of this is to ask the question, which of those world systems has the most rational system for us as human beings? And so we say that Islam is the only religion which which gives you a rational understanding of who this one God is. All of the
You
other...
haven't mentioned that. I've asked you several times, but you haven't really mentioned
Go on.
this rationality of the God, because you've just said the sperm becoming attaching itself to the uterus wall and becoming a baby and a human being, but it doesn't sound like there's a lot there to understand God in the Islamic religion.
Well, that's because I only quoted one verse out of 6,236.
All right, fair enough.
But that was just the one I chose to tell you. I don't know, because you were talking about aimlessness, and I thought there were about 4 or 5 verses in the Quran which talk about that. That's just the one I decided to pick out. So yeah, I mean, what I'm saying to you is first and foremost, Islam has the most rational understanding or cogent understanding of God, of all of the major world religions. So for example, we'll take Trinitarianism, right? Where you have 3 persons and one entity, right? We say that that's a self-contradiction. Look at atheism, where
I got something to say about that. Just a side point. If you look into quantum theory, you're going to find everything is irrational, and it's the basis of our reality.
Okay.
That's all I want to say. If you look at the basis of everything, it doesn't make rational sense. And we're saying that no powerful being has to be rational when everything that we're made of is irrational.
I think that makes sense to a certain degree, but I think there's a difference. You made a good point. With quantum physics, right, the difference is that just because we don't know why the paradoxes exist between the quantum world and the macro scientific world, it doesn't mean that means that that's irrational. It just means that we don't know what it is yet.
Sure,
so
but that's the fundamental basis of everything that we know. So surely we should tackle that before we say that this God is the most rational thing.
I'll tell you why that's not the case, right? Quantum theory, you arrive at it through the scientific method, isn't it?
Yeah.
And the scientific method is presupposed by logical principles, which are metaphysical, non-naturalistic and non-material. And so from that angle, science could not exist without logic, but logic can exist without science. And from that angle, talking about quantum mechanics, in any way that aims to put it against, for example, the laws of logic, and allow it to triumph over it, would be an intellectual miscarriage of justice.
I don't think so. I think assuming that reality is logical and rational is the first mistake. I don't think there's anything logical about existence or rational about it.
Does logic exist outside of us? Are we just trying to force logic on something
exactly what you mean. I was going to
that
say,
seems so strange.
Do you believe in something called? Do you believe in logic or not?
The beginning.
Do you believe in logical principles? Do you believe in the existence of logical principles?
I think logic is there, but when you say, "Do I believe?" I mean, that's a weird statement to arrive at. Like, what
Does it exist? Do logical principles exist?
Do you mean beyond what we think is logical?
No.
Like,
for example, the law of
independent of us?
non-contradiction. Yeah. Does that exist, or is it not? Does it not exist?
Well, that would, as a statement, that does exist.
Not as a statement, as a reality. If I say that contradictions cannot coexist,
But they do. They do. That's
so,
what I'm
so
talking
you
about.
believe in contradictions?
Man, you can observe them.
No, I'm not talking about on a physical level. I'm
No,
talking
as a
about
statement,
ontologically.
But
Yeah.
what value does that have? If
Very big value.
in word games it does, but
Why
not
do you think?
if we're trying to go for something real. Like if you look at the basis of reality, and I'm saying that.
So you don't believe in logic?
I'm going to keep going.
Right, sorry.
You look at the basis of reality, and you see contradictions inherent in it. You've got contradictions there, right there. So whether I say that it matters or not, it's not important.
Can I explain why that's a misunderstanding? Right. So when you talk about quantum theory, you're looking at perceived contradictions, because quantum theory.
Everything's perception.
No. Quantum theory, like everything scientific, requires instruments to be able to get to that knowledge, which, by the way, have been disputed. Like in the scientific community, do we have reliable instruments enough to get to the quantum level, and so on? And requires inference. So you have instruments and inference. Now, the inference that you're going to have is going to be based on the dominant scientific paradigm that we have at the moment, right? And when you use that dominant scientific paradigm and it doesn't give you the results you want on the quantum level, then you start saying there's a contradiction. This sounds like you could make an argument that there will be a scientific paradigm shift as a result of that. That's exactly how Newtonian physics moved to Einsteinian physics.
Right.
There might be now someone who comes out, an Einstein 2, if you like, and he says, look, I know a way to account for these aberrational quantum physics results and also account for the macro science.
Yeah.
So I have an all-inclusive theory. If that theory is proposed, that theory will be accepted, and what the Einsteinian general relativity theory, the dominant paradigm, will be replaced. That's all that will happen. Now, for us to say now, before that transition takes place, that okay, that means that there are contradictions existing, it's not a justifiable statement, because actually we're basing it on our scientific understanding based on the model that we have at the moment. If the model changes, the contradictions may be explained.
Yeah,
if the
that's
model,
true.
do you see what I mean?
It can be. I'm fully open to that
you agree with me,
possibility.
right?
I'm open to the idea.
So now we agree.
I'm saying, of course, it might be shown to be non-contradictory, but at the moment it's not.
Right.
And I can't assume infinite knowledge,
But
and I would extend that and say neither can you.
Yeah, 100%. So what I'm saying is, the reason why I say that logical principles are more epistemically certain than the scientific method is because the whole scientific method is based on logical principles, rather than logical principles being based on a scientific method. So it's not possible for logic to be based on science, but it's possible for science to be based on logic. If logic collapses, science collapses. If science collapses, logic stays the same. And the same thing with mathematics, right? Mathematics has been argued, but with severe refutation, to be an extension of logic, although that's not the case. We know it's not the case. Well, these are ontological concepts. They're non-cosmological in nature. You can't put numbers under a microscope, and for that reason, mathematics, you could argue, although there have been claims in philosophy to show the incompleteness of it, by Gödel, for example, is more incorrigible, or more likely to be incorrigible than science. So science, in the epistemic weighting compared to logical principles and mathematical principles, is probably bottom of the list, because of the susceptibility of science to corrigibility.
Right. Yeah. There's an idea that mathematics is decoding the code of the universe.
Yes.
Has the essence of it in itself. So, like you say, mathematics seems to exist whether we like it or not, whether we understand it or perceive it or not.
So that's why
like
I say,
code.
Perfect. And this is why when we talk about the existence of God, right, which is the first thing we talked about today, what the arguments I put forward are not just cosmological. Because cosmological arguments are contingent upon scientific understandings. If I give you an argument for the existence of God, which talks about everything that begins to exist has a cause, and the universe began to exist, therefore the universe had a cause, that highly depends upon our understanding of science. So I can, for example, cite the second law of thermodynamics or the Big Bang Theory redshift. I'm not using that. I mean, I could use that and say I believe in those things. I believe that the universe was created ex nihilo and so on. But I'm saying that we can prove the existence of God ontologically as well as cosmologically. So in other words, it can be done as a mental understanding, like mathematics, like logic, as well as cosmologically. And that basically leaves for someone no room to run or no room to hide. If you believe in the ontological superiority of the cosmos, then you will be forced to believe that there's an independent one entity which is incorporeal, immaterial, and which everything else depends on.
Or it could be all a product of yourself. Everything that you observe could be a product of your own creation. It could be you, the point of awareness that we all have, creating everything.
Well, here's the thing.
Why not?
I'll tell you something, right?
I don't see that being refuted.
Well, this is the discussion in philosophy, right? So the discussion is, how do we prove that cosmological realities are any more epistemically true than ontological ones? But for example, like ontological ones is in the mind. When I say ontology, I'm talking about that which is in the mind, yes? So mathematics is in the mind. So if I say mathematics is an ontological thing, yes? And it has nothing to do with cosmos. Nothing to do with the cosmos, yeah? Which means nothing to do with the physical reality. And mathematics itself is something which is, we've agreed, is actually stronger than the scientific method and its churnings, or that which can be produced from it as a net result of it.
Can you have science without math, though?
Pardon?
Maybe it's a bit of a diversion,
Sorry?
but can you have science without math?
Can you have science without maths?
Yeah. No, just an open question. Maybe we don't want to target that right now. But
You can't have physics without maths, for sure. Yeah, right?
interesting point.
Physics will be a difficult thing to prove that you can have
And
without
that's the
maths.
basis of science, is physics.
Well, you could argue that's an argument.
Well,
right?
I think so, because it's looking at the basis of reality. It's looking at the fundamental particles of existence.
Yeah.
Everything else is contingent upon that.
Yeah,
So I'd say it is the
yeah, you
fundamental
could argue,
science.
and values and stuff. They're attached to mathematics.
Values?
Yeah.
What do you mean by values? You mean moral values?
No,
Right, okay, I was like,
no.
fuck. You lost me completely.
Gravitational constant. the value of how heavy this thing is.
Right.
All of those need numbers, otherwise they're meaningless.
Right,
Otherwise you
yeah.
put letters next to them or something,
Yeah,
right?
I understand that.
Yeah. So the point is, what I'm saying to you is that when I say, and this was a bit of a diversion, but going back to the main point, when I say we can rationalize the existence of God and so on, I think that can be done in the mind and in the real world, using both ways. Okay, so it's kind of like mathematics. You see what I'm trying to say? It's kind of like mathematics, but it's also like science. So you can have both. So when we talk about discursive rationalization, because when we say rationality or reason, what do we actually mean? There must be a method of finding out something, right? I'm saying that when we reason, we arrive at the fact that there's one God, and that independent God caused to exist everything that is in existence, and also as an extension of that, is ascribed purpose to that human being. And that was the discussion that we were then having.
But you're saying this God didn't have a cause.
Yeah, it was it. So causation, by the way, I'm going to throw away the word causation, because I didn't say it. Because with these discussions, I mean, usually when I'm talking to an atheist, I'm not saying you're one of them, I don't know what your disposition is, but there's obsessions with certain things like infinity, causation and stuff. So forget about it, depends on, right? Everything depends upon.
Right, but it doesn't depend on anything
Yeah,
else.
it doesn't depend on anything.
So you've decided to just kind of stop at God. You don't want to go further back from it.
There's no back and forward when we're talking about dependency, contingency, because the discussion of time is a very complicated philosophical discussion. I try and keep away from it by not even mentioning it, or mentioning that which depends upon it. So when I say that something depends upon something, that can do so independent of time. So yeah, everything depends upon, and you know the argument, I've put it to you before, right? I said to you, look, have we got a pen and a paper? Have we got a pen and a paper? Let me get my notes out, yeah? I got this, brother got me a phone, mashallah, you know, because I lost my phone in Malaysia. Alright. How do I make the pen work? Alright, okay. Yes? So here, you've got a series, yeah? This is a series. Let's say, call it series 1, yeah? S1. Yeah, let me show the cameras so they can see what we're talking about. S1, yeah? Alright. Now, here, you've got the things that exist that are in existence. Say, for example, you have, like, let's call it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, yeah? Are you with me on this, yeah? These are all things that are in existence, yeah? Can you see? Alright. Now, there's two options. For the sake of argument, I don't even believe in infinity in the real world, but let's say for the sake of argument, this goes on to infinity, yeah? This goes on to infinity, yeah? Can you see? Everyone can see, yeah? Infinity, yeah? Alright. Now, really you have two options. If everything of those things, 1, 2, 3 and so on, or ABC or whatever, right? If they're all dependent things, if 1 is dependent, 2 is dependent, 3 is dependent, 4 is dependent, 5 is dependent, and they're all dependent on each other, you literally only have two options, yes? Option 1. And when we say dependent, I'm talking about dependent for existence, yeah? So it's, in other words, 1 is dependent on 2 for its existence, 2 is dependent on 3 for its existence, and so on. You have two options. Either the series is dependent on itself. Yes? That's option 1. Option 2 is that the series is dependent upon something which is outside of the series, which is independent, so everything depends upon that series, on that independent. These are the only two logical options. There's no third. In fact, I'll challenge you, anyone, right?
Okay. Isn't there a possibility of there's an infinite series that depend on each other?
Yeah, that's what we said. There's two things, right?
Yeah.
Either the series itself has an infinite amount of things which are dependent on each other, and the thing itself becomes independent from that, or it depends upon something outside which is independent. There's no other options. Let me give you an easy example, right? Say, for example, we have phones. We have mobile phones.
I understand you.
Yeah, but just for everyone else, right? I know you understand. But say we've got phones, yeah? So you have one phone, you have two phones, you have three phones, yeah? What do phones require in order to operate? Electricity, power, energy, and so on. We agree, yeah? So if we have three phones that all require energy to be powered, in this analogy, power or energy will represent existence, okay? In this analogy. So if we have 3 phones that require power in order to exist, if I put 3 phones together, what will happen after 24 hours? And I connect them all to each other. What will happen after 24 hours? They all die out, isn't it? So they all die out. Why? Because the energy resource has been depleted, isn't it? We all agree. There's no difference of opinion. So in this analogy, in the universe, in existence, there are things which, let's say, they depend upon each other. If there is no external source, if you like, which is not dependent on anything, then nothing will exist. Does that make sense? Now,
I dispute one part of that.
There's one disputation. Can I say it before you say it?
You can try. It might not be the thing I'm
If
thinking.
there's an infinite amount of those things, you could argue they can be self-powered. In this analogy, if there's an infinite amount of phones, that's one argument. Which is why I said there's only 2 ways you can go.
It wasn't what I was going to say.
All right, go on.
It was that. So let's say we've got this. We have this series,
Yes.
and it needs something outside of its realm to create it. Dependent upon that. Okay. Now the force outside of it. How do we know for certain that is not dependent on something else?
It's by necessity.
But why is it? Why is it
by?
necessity?
So it's ontologically necessary,
Why?
as well as cosmologically. Why? Because let me tell you why it's necessary. It's impossible to have existence without it. So, for example, in our analogy of the mobile phones, if we have 3 mobile phones and they're all connected to each other, it's impossible to conceive that those 3 mobile phones will continue being powered for 1,000 years. And in the same thing,
I don't know. There's energy in the universe, and it stays. It doesn't. There's no energy is not created or destroyed.
That's in a closed circuit.
Right, but that's what we're saying. It's a closed system.
Yeah, okay, even if you say it's a closed system, but the closed system of the universe, someone might argue about multiverse, right?
Oh, sure.
And if the universe had an inception, then there was a time where energy didn't exist, and now then it became existent. So,
well, unless the universe didn't have an inception.
Pardon? Yeah, so okay, that's fine. If you say that the universe always existed, which is obviously, for the sake of argument, unscientific, right? Then you can make the argument that everything exists within the universe, or everything is dependent on it. So that universe becomes the independent, if you like. You still have to say that there's one independent. If the series does not have one independent, existence would not be possible.
Well, it might do.
How?
But I'm saying it's the next tier.
If the system does not have one independent, existence would not be possible. If you say the series is independent, then the series is independent.
It's assuming that it will last forever.
But you see, look, you have
Maybe the force outside it won't last forever.
There's 2 options, right? Either the series with the infinite amount of phones is the independent. The series itself is independent, right? Or there's something outside of the series which is independent, which the series depends upon. In both cases, you have what? You have the independent. And all we're saying as Muslims is there is an independent, one independent entity. That's the first point. Once you've acknowledged that the independent is there, then we ask the question: the series itself, is it made up of parts? If you say the series itself is made up of parts, I have an argument to make. I'll say that everything which is generated is a compound is generated.
Let's say you're right. I have a question. What's the only thing that you know to be true? What's the only thing you can know to be the case, to exist?
I exist, yeah.
What is the only thing?
Pardon?
You understand me? Nobody understand me? No. The only thing that you can know exists is that you have a point of awareness. That's it.
That's the pinnacle of certainty, isn't it?
But that's all you got. That's all we got. Everything else can easily be an illusion. And
yeah,
we've got that. So why is that awareness not God?
Okay, no problem.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I get
that infinite force that's created all.
But now we're talking about the attributes of God rather than his existence or not. So we've kind of crossed the bridge now in that case.
Well, I'm saying that your point of awareness might be God.
Okay.
That's my point.
No
I don't
problem.
see why
yeah,
not.
I
terminology.
Yeah, no problem. I don't have a problem with that.
I don't really understand the necessity.
All right. Okay, look. If you have 5 phones, is it necessary for there to be an outside power for all of them to be continually generated?
Charge. You mean like in electricity,
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
fine. If every power source depended upon another power source ad infinitum, then what would we have?
And you're saying that in Islamically that's God.
No, we're saying that there must have been an independent thing outside of this series, which everything in that series depend on. Now, you could argue, the only argument that can be made...
Unless it has always existed.
What has always existed? We're not talking about time here. Okay? This is not about temporality. It could be related to time or not. It's nothing to do with time.
It has nothing to do with time.
Yeah.
Did you understand the example I gave?
About higher planes.
Now, the reason why, I would say, one more thing now, the reason why in that series, an infinite amount of things cannot exist and be dependent upon each other that way, is every compound is a generated thing. The series, in this case, is a compound, therefore the series is a generated thing. In effect, what I'm telling you is, everything with parts is necessarily dependent on those parts. If the series, if we take out one of those things, in the series, then the question is the dependency the same? Dependency is not the same. So we require one thing, okay? We require one independent, which is immaterial, not composed of parts.
Yeah, your awareness.
You could call it awareness, but for me, you've just referenced God in another language. You've just called God the awareness. You can call him that if you want.
But you're not subservient to it. That's my point.
Well, they actually absolutely are subservient, because if you depend upon it, then you're subservient to it by definition.
Why are you not creating it right now? Why are you not a spontaneous point of
creating
creation?
is different.
Why would you want to be subservient?
It's not about wanting, it's about the fact that you are.
Okay, but in that case, then let's say
you're a Muslim by virtue of existence, which means you submit yourself to God, but you're not a Muslim by virtue of will. That's the only thing that you need to do now. Do you know what I mean? The only thing you need to recognize is the fact that you're already submissive.
Yeah, but the way you've explained it, if this is God, the way you've explained it, it seems like this is an extremely distant entity. It seems like this is an extremely distant, inconsequential entity.
Well,
because the God that you worship is the God that requires 5 times a prayer a day, the Hajj,
interventionist.
Exactly, yeah. So it doesn't. It sounds like almost it's a different God you're talking about.
No, because these attributes that I've described, I've said to you, are not exhaustive.
You could believe in that God without having to pray 5 times a day or grow the beard, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. But that is a starting point for us. The list of attributes that we've just outlined is not exhaustive but suggestive, right? So in other words, those attributes, the oneness, the independence, and so on, immateriality and incorporeality, and the fact that he doesn't have parts and so on, these are necessary understandings of what God is, but they're not exhaustive understandings. We say that, I agree, and I've always said this to you, right, that you cannot rationalize every attribute of God through discursive rationalization. But once you rationalize 4 or 5 of those attributes, you leave atheism aside.
But 4 or 5, is that enough for you?
Absolutely.
Really?
No, it's not enough for me. It's enough to it's enough to do away with the atheistic thesis. You can no longer call yourself an atheist and believe in an independent, incorporeal, immaterial entity that everything depends upon. There's no way you can call yourself an atheist and believe in that. It does not work. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So in the initial phase, I'm saying that ontologically and cosmologically, it makes perfect logical sense to believe in this entity as a starting point. After that now, the question is, what is the relationship between us as human beings and this entity?
I don't see why it's external.
Yeah,
I'm following you. This is actually really interesting, for sure. Much better than the last time.
Okay.
I can't understand why this is an external entity. I can't understand why it's not just internal manipulations.
Or internal being generated by yourself.
We said why it can't be generated by yourself. The reason why is because
you might be that force, the generative force.
It's impossible because we know.
I don't see why.
No, cosmologically, if you want to use that argument, right, we know we had an inception, right? We had a beginning. But
the universe can be switched on.
But even if we don't go down that route, we can say, but we know we're dependent. I mean, I had to drink a lot of drink today and eat a lot of
physically.
Food. Yeah.
But are you only physical?
Okay, so you're talking about the metaphysical aspect.
Yeah, for sure.
No problem. So here, we go back to our series. Okay, is our existence independent?
Which one? This illusionary physical?
Any existence.
Well, the physical one, sure.
If we say that do you believe in the existence of other minds and other people, or not?
It's a great question. It could be that.
I don't think you can really ask that question.
I can give us a theory. Is that maybe there's only one central point of awareness, and we're all manifestations of that possibility.
Because you've started off with an
If
isolated
that makes sense to
self.
anyone?
Yeah.
Think about it.
Yeah,
No, because
that's an explanation.
What he's done is he started off with an isolated self.
Right. I
And
don't think.
when you have that starting point, then obviously you're going to start thinking about other minds and other people. But if you don't start off with that,
I think we're
if you're,
connected.
if you're not starting off from that point, then you don't really even need to ask that question.
I understand, but you understand that. You understand this, right? You understand that why we must be one independent and so on.
What?
When we're a child, we're relying on other minds, like the mother's mind to.
Yeah, but you're not even aware of
He's
that.
at this point. We haven't even gotten to the stage where he's accepting the mother's mind exists.
He's basically saying that it's all an illusion, right?
The physical is.
There's
Well,
like
that's
no
what he's
series.
But that's not what we are.
That's what he's
I don't
saying.
think we're from here. I don't think we're part of this. I think it might be a simulation, an illusion.
That's not why.
Yeah, but that's one option, but I don't think that's
But do you know what? Yeah, you're right. You know
definitely
why?
not.
Because if sometimes when I speak to like atheists and act like that, you're a very nice guy in yourself, and you're a very nice guy, right? You put on this ultra skeptic kind of.
I want to understand.
No, because it's not a matter of ultra skeptic.
I don't know.
It's your starting
And
point.
I'm happy with it. And I'm
Because
happy
you've
with it. I like
started
it.
off-
I personally like it. I enjoy it. But
No, because
the truth is, I want you to be honest with yourselves. Like, is
No,
this
no,
exactly
no.
what it's like? Someone attacks you on the streets. I mean, are we going to have this ultra skeptic attitude? Are we going to go to the police with certainty that he slapped me, right? I mean, if you're fired from work on unjust grounds, and then all of those things happen to you on a daily basis that do happen to you, as I'm sure they do, right? Are we gonna really go through the same process?
Everything you're
I'm gonna
describing.
say, my
is-
boss, I don't know if he exists or not. You know?
No, because
Everything
it's
you're
not about
describing
that.
is
It's
from
not
your
about
senses,
that.
man.
That's
Yeah,
not about
yeah.
And
that.
we
I
don't
get it,
know
I
if
get
your
it.
senses are legit.
But would you use that interrogation if a crime was done against you or something happened to you in your life?
Well, people do.
There are
People do
different
all the time.
resolutions of analysis, aren't they? We're
Yeah, I
either
get it, I get
going
it,
to
but-
contemplate the nature of existence, or we're going to say, how do we live day by day? It's kind of different.
No, it's important because you got to ask yourself, and this is a question that's kind of outside of our philosophical discourse here.
Why?
But
This one? Or have we
No,
Islam?
which is that the question is why do we apply different standards of epistemic truth to different things? Like, for example, if you believe that your day-to-day life is worth living, then and your philosophical analysis here in this park is the correct kind of skepticism that you should have. It's the Goldilocks middle ground.
For myself it is, but I'm not saying to anyone else.
Why don't we apply this ultra skepticism to everything that happens to you in your life?
You don't need to. That doesn't make sense.
Oh, he's coming on my side, this guy.
Hello
there. I think
No,
what we need to do is we need to get some food after, so we sit down with each other. I need to walk around a little bit.
This happens.
Is that all right?
This happens every time.
Because you know why?
Because as a religious person, you're stuck.
Happens
Am I
every time.
stuck?
Anyway, good conversation. Anyway, good
You
conversation.
can continue with me if you think I'm stuck.
No, it's fine. I need to go eat as well.
I'm cool.
Okay, so you're hungry, yeah? We can eat together. That's the last thing you said. is
About the
I'm
nature of
stuck.
existence, about whoever God is
Take care,
rational,
man.
irrational exists. I don't think existence is wrong.
Right, thank you, man.
What do you mean by that? The problem with the religious world
Content over everything. From young to
Man, say it straight. Man, don't listen to BBC. Man, don't listen to ITV. Listen.
He sees Islam as a powerful force that he respects in a way in terms of his teaching. No, he doesn't. When I say respect, I don't mean it in the way you think, but as a force that's strong. So, yeah, we condemn that. And I said it. You mad? I said it. Oh, right. I think you said right. So basically, when it, and I totally condemn that. I'm not going to associate with it. Yeah? But the thing is, it's not my bedroom. So